This is Dan Cohen with Behind the Headlines. Major development in Haiti. President Jovenel Moises is dead. He was assassinated in his home early this morning by unknown gunmen. His wife was injured and is reportedly in Miami being treated now. Moises had overstayed his term as president and had become a de facto dictator, had no shortage of enemies in Haiti. So, to break down this shocking development, speaking with journalist Kim Ives, editor of the excellent newspaper Haiti Liberté. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Dan. And in fact, I'm the editor of the English section of the excellent newspaper Haiti Liberté.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, a little addendum. So first, can you just tell me what you know so far about the assassination? When did it happen? When did it go? How did it go down? What are the details that we know at this point?
Well, there's a lot of rumor flying around, but it seems that between 3 and 4 a.m. this morning, 9 brand new Nissan patrol vehicles pulled up to the presidential compound up in Pèlerin, which is a mountain enclave where the well-to-do live, above Port-au-Prince, up in the mountains up by Pétionville, where most of the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, lives. And they apparently said they were with the DEA, maybe to put down the guard of the USGPN, that's the special unit for the presidential guard, and came in and shot the president and wounded his wife. That's about all we know for sure. Right now, there seems to be a situation on the Place Saint-Pierre in Pétionville, just down the hill, where 2 of the commando unit that carried out the killing were apparently snared by Haitian police and are in a hostage situation. They've taken a few policemen at the police station on the central square there in Pétionville hostage. And so we'll wait to see how that plays out. But of course, the big question everybody's asking is who sent them and who paid for them, because it was definitely a very well-financed, well-planned operation. They had the layout of the presidential compound. They knew where they were going, knew what they were doing. And so this was something which wasn't spontaneous, had nothing to do, it appears, with this week's events, which were also quite bloody, with about 15 people being killed on Delma 32, a populous area downtown. 2 journalists, one an activist and journalist, and the other journalist killed. So the operation seems to have been planned and financed very well. And so we have to find out who was behind that.
I've seen some reports, I know you've seen them too, that the assassins were speaking Spanish.
Right.
Obviously, Haiti is a French Creole speaking country, so that would mean that they're foreign.
Right.
I can't help but wonder if that's true, or if it's maybe a way to throw people off the trail. What's your sense of that detail?
No, I think it was, judging from the sophistication of the operation, I think it was probably foreign mercenaries. This is not the first time they've been used in Haiti. I did a piece 2 years ago in The Intercept about 8 mercenaries who came down. They were hired by Jovenel Moïse to come and steal $80 million of funds that belonged to Venezuela out of the central bank. Apparently, they couldn't be transferred to Venezuela, and they were going to take it and use it for I don't know what, but they got foiled by the Haitian police. So mercenaries have been used before in Haiti, and all indications are that this was a mercenary group. There seems to be a video out. I have not seen it yet, but I'm told that you can hear somebody speaking English with an American accent. I'm not sure what type of American accent is on that video. Is it a fake? You know, this often happens when there's the big news story in Haiti, that a lot of fake stuff goes up. There's already a fake picture of Jovenel lying dead on his back with a bloody shirt. But I was recently called about a half hour ago to be told that that was a faked picture. So, you know, this is the kind of thing that's going to be going on for the next few days.
Can you talk about who Moises was? You know, what is his constituency, his connections domestically and internationally, so people just, you know, understand what
Yeah.
he represented?
Well, it's to really understand Moise, you have to understand his mentor and the guy who anointed him president, which was Michel Martelly. Basically, I will have to go back, in fact, a little more, back to really 35 years to 1986, February 7th, when Jean-Claude Duvalier was driven from the country. And there followed about 5 years of real tumult in Haiti, coup d'etats, mass demonstrations, and it all ended on December 16th, 1990, with the election of a liberation theologian, priest Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who foiled US election engineering for the first time recently. And this caused, of course, great alarm in Washington. They were very upset by this. And in fact, it went on to be sort of a model, because Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and Evo Morales in Ecuador and others throughout the continent saw what the Haitians did, and they began the pink tide. So at that point, the U.S. immediately set the engines of regime change going and carried out a coup 8 months later in September. 8 months after his inauguration on February 7th, 1991. And they carried out a coup which caused, they say, the death of maybe 3,000 to 5,000 people. Lasted 3 years and ended with the U.S. occupation of Haiti. So that occupation lasted for really until about the year 2000. And at that point, Aristide came back into power and was ruling, but immediately was beset by the recently inaugurated government of George W. Bush, who also wanted him out. So they did a more long-term thing to make sure he wouldn't be restored the same way that he was in 1994, where he was brought back on the shoulders of 20,000 US troops. 2000 to 2004 was a typical low-intensity war. They sent mercenaries, not mercenaries, sort of a contra force working out of the Dominican Republic to attack Haitian police bases. There was diplomatic, there was the typical National Endowment for Democracy fronts that were set up, what was something they called the Group of 184, a thing called the Democratic Consultation. And they managed to carry out the coup on February 29th, 2004. Aristide was flown to Africa. He came back briefly and stayed in Jamaica for a while, but then he was flown back to South Africa, where he spent 7 years in exile, coming back in 2001. Now, that period from 1986 to 2011, when he came back, was a reign of, we could say, two Lavalas and I could say semi-Lavalas governments. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, a guy who they often called his twin, René Préval, then Jean-Bertrand Aristide and René Préval. So the U.S. was really fed up with this situation. They wanted them out, And so after 20 years of Lavalas and semi-Lavalas government, they said, it's time for a change. And that's when they brought in Michel Martelly. Now, Michel Martelly was a very vulgar, ribald compa musician who sang songs and pulled his pants down on stage and stuff like that. And so and often that happens even here, name recognition sells. So he was elected, but what he represented was really what the old Duvalierist regime represented, which was a marriage of the two ruling groups in Haiti. Haiti has a bicameral, if you will, ruling class. On the one hand, you have the comprador bourgeoisie, the import-export bourgeoisie based in the cities. And then you have a big landowning class called the Grandons. But it's not as apparent as it is in many places in Latin America, where you have those big latifundia and haciendas, etc. It's small plots, small peasant plots. And a lot of the time, the Grandons are sort of invisible. They'll even live in the town. A lot of the peasants working their land are their kids, this kind of thing. So the Grandons and the bourgeoisie have battled for political power throughout Haiti's history. And their marriage really came with Jean-Claude Duvalier in 1980. And so Martelly was really a return to this. And it was essentially all the repression and corruption of the Grandons combined with the lackey approach of the bourgeoisie to US imperialism. So he was the worst of both worlds, we could say. And he came in, his government was, which was from basically 2011 to 2016, was marred by tremendous corruption, repression, etc. And I should not neglect to say that it was, in fact, Hillary Clinton at the very peak of the Arab Spring, who flew in January 2011 to read the riot act to René Préval to say, listen, your candidate, a guy called Jude Celestin, who had come in second and was going to be in the runoff, he's not going to be in the runoff anymore. It's going to be Michel Martelly. So the U.S. shoehorned in Michel Martelly and this, what I call a clown mafia, which proceeded to basically burn through the money of what was called the Petro-Caribe Fund. In 2008, Préval had negotiated a deal with Hugo Chavez for Haiti to get about 20,000 barrels a day of Venezuelan crude, but Haiti had a special sweetener because it had only to pay 60% of their bill up front. The remaining 40% went into this Petro-Caribe Fund. And that could be used for building roads, schools, clinics, whatever the Haitian people needed. And this was Chavez's way of not only building goodwill, but creating an alternative to the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, et cetera. It was a brilliant idea and should have worked very well, except that in came Michel Martelly, and he burned through like 75% of it in his 5 years. And so basically they had a ticket and for free rides everywhere. And they ended up buying houses on the Gold Coast of Haiti, and a lot of the money disappeared. And there was a whole movement, which we can go into later if we need to, that emerged under Jovenel Moïse, asking where did the Petro-Caribe money go, about $2 billion. So as Martelly was basically being forced out because he didn't hold elections either, the population rose up and basically said, you are leaving. And the candidate that he put forward was Jovenel Moïse, who was not like him. Martelly is sort of a light-skinned, mulatto-ish guy who had a kind of a bourgeois look, we could say. Moïse who is very dark and skinny, was very dark and skinny, looked like somebody from the Haitian countryside. So he was the perfect sort of stand-in for this party, which was seen as a bourgeois party. Uh, and but he was a front man. In Haiti, they call it the politique de doubleur, the politics of putting a front person, a blackface in front. So in came Jovenel Moise, and things got even worse because Donald Trump, when he came into power about the same time in 2017, immediately slapped a bunch of new sanctions on Venezuela, made it impossible for the Petrocaribe Fund to continue functioning, for the cheap oil to continue flowing. And therefore, Jovenel suddenly had no money like Martelly had. So now, Jovenel, who had come into power with everybody happy that the same festival of corruption was going to continue, suddenly he had to go to the bourgeoisie, who had gotten all kinds of sweetheart deals for energy, for ports, for a lot of different elements of the economy. And he said to the people, you guys got to cut me some slack because, I don't have the money anymore. The Petrocaribe is finished. But they weren't having it. They said, no, we're running this show, not you. You're just our puppet. And sure enough, a war broke out. They started to fund a lot of the opposition and demonstrations and actions against Jovenel. Jovenel dug in and said, I'm not going anywhere. I got here and I'm staying here until 2022, even though the Constitution says very clearly the election was supposed to happen in 2016. If it happens in 2016, it's like you begin it on February 7th of that year. His election was in November, but it was supposed to start on February 7th. So theoretically, he should only really have served 4 years, even though the formal term is 5. But he said, I'm taking my 5, and the US backed him on that. So, but where Moise really got his main support, I could say, in his final days, in his final years, was when he stuck a knife in the back of Venezuela. And that happened in 2019, and basically flipped. Haiti had been defending Venezuela in the OAS until then. And then in January 2019, Haiti went over to the US coalition working against Maduro and the Venezuelan revolution, and became the front man now for that effort. And that's when the support from the Trump administration just went into overdrive. Every week there was a new State Department official or the World Bank or this official, that official, showing support, giving him all kinds of praise and money, some of it under the table, we believe, but not enough really. So he was totally dependent on the U.S., and the U.S. really liked the fact that they had this Haitian president in their pocket and able to use, especially Trump. Now, when Biden came in, unfortunately for Jovenel, they started, form means a little more for those people, even though in essence they were keeping the same thing. And they were saying, please, cool it. You have to do a few less decrees, because since January 2020, because no elections were held, the parliament expired, and Jovenel was ruling just by decree, and he was doing crazy decrees. For instance, in November of 2020, he passed a decree which said that he was creating the what was called the National Agency for Development for Intelligence, the ANI, ANI. And this was like a Gestapo, because these people could not only spy, the agents of the ANI could not only spy, but they could arrest you and they could even kill you. And on top of it, they couldn't be prosecuted. So, it was a total Gestapo unit, very much like the Tonton Macoutes that the Duvalier regime used to maintain its power. And the Biden administration and the Democrats, even though, like all liberals, they, want to keep the essence, but have the form be a little more fuzzy, put a velvet glove on the iron fist. So they started to make noises about, please don't be so authoritarian, don't do so many mean decrees. And as my sources in some of the higher up quarters of the security apparatus were saying, they were starting to think, well, maybe we really do need to do a transition and bring somebody from this bourgeois opposition in, because Chauvinel might not be able to deliver us the principal window dressing we need, which is an election. And that was supposed to take place in September and November. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen now, nor is his constitutional referendum going to happen. But this was essentially the power behind it. At the end of the day, when he died, it was principally the U.S. which was propping him up, and a few families in the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, I mean, what you said about Venezuela, I mean, Juan Guaido, the failed coup leader of Venezuela and permanent self-declared interim president, was one of the first people that I saw to tweet out condolences and his outrage about the assassination. I guess one thing I wonder, I know there's been speculation. There's all kinds of speculation, of every which way possible. Could it be that that Moise outlived his usefulness? I mean, if the U.S. wants to have some kind of transition, it seems kind of crazy that maybe the U.S. would be behind this, just assassinating him if they want it to be prettier and kind of have some faux democratic look to it.
Right. Well, there's a couple of antecedents to consider for that scenario. So let's think about that for a minute. The first U.S. occupation in 1915 was essentially justified by the fact that a crowd tore limb from limb a Haitian president who had sought refuge in the French embassy. And they said, oh my God, these people, they can't deal with democracy, which is similar to what a New York Times article early in the day said. They removed that when everybody made outcry. But that might have been some of the thinking. Now, we do know the U.S. has had puppets in countries, but if they've been resistant to removal, they've had to appeal to a higher authority, the gun. We saw this in the early 60s with the removal across the border in the Dominican Republic of Rafael Trujillo, who was there for 3 decades as the Dominican dictator working for U.S. interests. We saw it in Vietnam about 2 or 3 years later when the Kennedy administration rubbed out Diem, who was their puppet in Vietnam. So they've been known to do this, but did they really need to do it with Jovenel? If they had said to Jovenel, listen, we got a nice little condo in Coral Gables for you, get on the plane and let's call it a day, I think he would have done it. So my guess is that it's more coming from the bourgeoisie. And this is because there is a revolution underway in Haiti. The huge lumpen proletariat of Port-au-Prince has grown to over 3 million people. 50 years ago, Haiti was primarily an agricultural society, small peasants, but due to neoliberal policies, the dumping of rice under the Clinton administration on Haiti and destroying Haitian rice production, destroying the lemon production, the coffee production. A lot of the dumping is coming from the Dominican Republic too. Essentially, Haitian agriculture is a shadow of its former self, and all those displaced peasants ended up in the cities, in these huge shanty towns, what they call bidonville, where people have no work, no services, and they're living day to day. As a result, what have emerged are strong men in these neighborhoods, gangs, some of them engaged in kidnapping and crime and terrible things, preying even on their own population. But there's another faction that emerged, which called itself the G9. It's called the Revolutionary Forces of the G9, family and allies. And they were against the criminal elements. They were fighting the criminal elements, and in fact have now called for a revolution. And their leader, a guy called Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier, and we can talk more about him, has said, we're going to the banks. We're going to take the money that's ours there. We're going to go to the car dealerships to take our cars. We're going to go to your supermarkets and take our food. So he's calling for a revolution of the people in these shanty towns, of the lumpen proletariat, against this bourgeoisie, 12 families, as he says, who control the entire economy, the ports, the factories, they own a lot of the land, etc. So I think they were scared to death of this guy, that he's scared the daylights out of him. Add to that fact, one of the principal opposition leaders, or I should say opposition bourgeois backers, is a guy, Reginald Boulos, had an arrest warrant put out for him this week. So between Cherizier's revolution, which looked like the end of the world to them, plus the arrest warrant, I don't think it's far-fetched to think that a number of the bourgeois, or maybe one, or maybe a consortium of them, because this operation definitely cost some money, may have got themselves together, hired these mercenaries. They go in, they do the job, they get Jovenel out of the way, and now they're going to concentrate on putting down this rebellion from the shanty towns, put down this lumpen proletariat. Now, their big problem there is, how are they going to do it? They need somebody strong in leadership, and Jovenel was not that. Jovenel was embattled, Jovenel was isolated, he had no state authority. So they need to get a strong leader in. They need to reinforce the 15,000 member police force. There's only 500 soldiers in the army. And so this is maybe plan A, but plan B may be a fourth foreign military occupation, where the US comes in and say, oh, look, it's terrible. They killed the president. They couldn't do him. These Haitians, they don't know how to carry out democracy. We have to come in again. We hate to do it. And, they tried to send in another UN force. Their big problem there is, though, they've declared war on China. So China can say, hey, screw that. You guys aren't doing anything with this Security Council. You're not getting any Chapter 7 again for Haiti. We're put the kibosh on that. So, Biden may find himself between a rock and a hard place on this one. I don't know if they're going to be able to get a fourth military occupation in a century into Haiti, and the Haitian people certainly are not going to accept it. So we have a very complicated situation.
Can you talk a little bit more about this figure, Jimmy
Cherizier?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he's talk about how he's portrayed in Western media, by the kind of Western NGOs, and how popular is he? How powerful is he? How I mean, it sounds like you're describing a real threat to U.S. neocolonialism. And this, dependency relationship that's existed for a while. So, tell us about him more.
It is a real threat. I mean, he was a stellar cop. He was a gung-ho cop with a special unit of the Haitian police, highly trained, called the Departmental Unit for the Maintenance of Order, UDMO. And their job was basically to put down the rebellions of the gangs and any demonstrations and that kind of thing. And there was a problem with gangs over in Grand Ravine, which is one of the principal areas of kidnapping in Haiti. And he was asked, he ran one of the bases out in Cité Soleil. He was asked to bring 10 soldiers. In fact, he could have sent 10, but he went himself as well. And this was all under UN command. There was a UN oversight of the whole operation. And they went in there. And in the course of the operation, they thought they were just collecting some guns that were being hidden at a school there. And it turns out in the room where the guns were, there weren't just the guns, but there were guys in the room. And when the cops went to go open the door, the guys opened up. 2 cops were killed. and all hell broke loose. The gangs and the cops were skirmishing. At the end of the day, 9 or 10 people were killed. The 2 cops were killed as well. And in any case, the human rights groups immediately were all over it. Now, the human rights groups in Haiti, in particular, the main one, which is called the Haitian Network of Human Rights Defense, called RNDDH, headed by a guy called Pierre Esperance. Now, they work very closely with the U.S. Embassy, and are I don't know their funding. I haven't investigated it, but I believe they get funding from all the usual suspects, probably Soros, NED, etc.
I mean, I can tell you, I'm just looking on the NED website. I can see last year they got 60 grand from the National Endowment for Democracy, the regime change arm of the U.S. And there's that's just 1 year. So
we can imagine that it's more. No, he's a very valued asset, and they've done some good work. I can say in the mercenary piece I did a few years ago, I worked with Esperance, and he was helpful, introduced me to the cops, and I was able to get the serial numbers on the guns the mercenaries illegally brought into Haiti and so forth. But at the end of the day, so in any case, Cherizier is basically hung out to dry by the police leadership because they're terrified of this human rights groups, because that means they're going to be in trouble with the U.S. and maybe they won't get a visa to go to their house in Miami if they have a chance to buy one, et cetera, et cetera. So they said, okay, we're going to make Cherizier the scapegoat. So now the guy has been, suddenly woken up, and he goes back to his poor neighborhood where he grew up. He was the son of a street vendor, a woman who sold barbecue meat. That's where he got his middle name, Barbecue, Jimmy Barbecue, because there were 3 Jimmys in the neighborhood. So they gave each one a last name given what their parent did. So there was Jimmy Barbecue. And he proceeded to say, I'm going to put order here in my neighborhood, because there were a lot of criminal gangs doing kidnappings. They were doing things like, hey, Joe, I see your daughter over there. Have her come over to my place at 6 o'clock, and, basically rape and all kinds of other criminal activity. And basically he went with his other UDMO guys, and they went to the guys with their M16s in front and said, listen, you guys, you're either going to stop what you're doing or we're going to kill you, or you can leave. And a lot of them left, and they fled to other neighborhoods. So around this time, he's in dealings with leaders of the opposition, guys like Yuri La Tortue, and who the WikiLeaks cables that Haiti Liberté published a decade ago called the poster boy for political corruption, a mafia don, etc. And a guy like Reginald Boulos, who we've talked about, who is one of the big bourgeois families. And what he found was, like, when Reginald Boulos said, listen, you see that Toyota dealer across the street on Delma? I want you to burn it down. It belonged to a family Saliba. But Cherizier said, we're not going to burn that down. We've been, helping this guy. He's been giving us protection money for years. So he saw what kind of scoundrels, what kind of scumbags this bourgeoisie was, and Yuri La Tortue. So he started to turn against these opposition figures too. And so he started to say, a pox on all of them. I'm against the whole system, and I want to get rid of this stinking rotten system and make a revolution and get food, clothes, housing, hospitals, schools, internet, roads for our people who are living, they're pooping in plastic bags and throwing it in a canal. This is the kind of life they're living. He showed me around the poor neighborhoods there. And
you went and met him.
Yes, I went. I spent a couple of days with him back in April because I wanted to see, who is this guy? Already my editors had, kind of flagged him and were watching him with great interest, and said, we need to find out who this is. So I spent a couple of days with him, talking with him at length, interviewing, getting toured around. And, he's the genuine article. He's a natural leader, very charismatic, very articulate, very intelligent. And he, really, and there are 2 things, as I say, in Haiti, for a leader to succeed, there are two features you really have to have. You can't be greedy, and you got to be brave. And he's not greedy. Here's a guy who would come, to see him after going through the various layers of security. And he's sleeping on a mattress on the gallery of a house in this, poor area. So he's not a fancy guy trying to, make money. He's living with the people. He's down with the people. And he's very brave. He's the kind of guy like in that operation that they did in Grand Ravine. He could have sent somebody else, but he went himself because he felt it was important that he be there to lead his men. So he's got this persona, which makes him a quote unquote natural leader. And but he has been totally vilified, one by this RNDDH, who, according to him, this Pierre Espérance came to him via a mutual school friend. He went to school with another opposition leader called Ronnie Timothée, who came to him and said, listen, Pierre has a question to ask you. Will you rub out his rival, a woman called Marie-Yolène Gilles, or Lélène? And, Cherizier was totally shocked and outraged by the question. He said, get out of here, So this was just before a second massacre happened in a nearby town of La Saline. Now, a nearby neighborhood of La Saline, right across the main boulevard in Port-au-Prince. Now, La Saline, is a big teeming area where actually Jean-Bertrand Aristide got his start as a parish priest, a liberation theologian in the church that was there, has since been burned down, St. John Bosco. And so the people from there said, listen, we're about to have a big fight here. And a lot of the guys that you ran out of Delma 2, 4, and 6 are probably going to come back here through the corridors, through these little tunnels that come across the street. Can you make sure you don't let them escape in here? And he said, no problem. We don't want them. And so in any case, he says that's the extent of his participation. He had nothing to do with the La Saline massacre, but in Pierre Espérance's report, he was cited as the architect, the guy who planned it, etc. Meanwhile, the opposition is getting afraid of him, mad at him. And in fact, the gangs up in the area of Bel Air, which has a gang called the Baz Cameroun, run by a guy called Dan Cohen, who's part of the opposition, they started to attack the Delma. And Cherizier, while he's not going to attack you, if you attack him, he is going to punch back. And he says, if you hit us, we're going to hit you back harder. And so a war sort of starts between Bel Air and him. But the people in Bel Air are pretty smart about their way to turn things. And so they say, oh, we're the victims. They came in, they're burning. He said he didn't even burn houses. He denies a lot of the charges they have put on him, but they painted him, and especially with this RNDDH alongside, as this monster, as this guy just killing people. But this is totally in contradiction with his public statements on YouTube, et cetera, where he's appealing for peace. He's saying, listen, my brothers and sisters in the poor shanty towns, we can't be fighting each other with the guns that the bourgeoisie has given us. Let's make peace among ourselves, and we turn our guns on them because they're the ones that are keeping us in this situation. Basically, he was able, after this 2018 was really a watershed, to make a truce between the various groups, even the groups that weren't part of his alliance, which was called the G9. There were 2 or 3 areas, Grand Ravine, Village de Dieu, where they were doing a great number of kidnappings and really preying on the people. He was opposed to it, and they fought it, and they said, we don't like it. At one point, he even said, I'm going to go down to Village de Dieu and stop that. And Village de Dieu said, well, we're going to come and get you. And anyway, none of that happened. But long story short, there was a truce for a year until this June, until a month ago. The opposition got a bunch of money. My sources in the UN tell me, and gave it to the Tilapli the gang leader of Grand Ravine. And they attacked a G9 member, the area, the neighborhood of Tibois. And that began a war. And then Bel Air attacked Delma. And then in Cité Soleil, the G9 groups started to fight with the opposition groups, the non-G9 groups out in Cité Soleil. So the whole city for the past month has been consumed with a lot of inter-neighborhood fighting and wars. So just last Wednesday, he went and he said, please, 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 let's make peace. I plead with you, Bel Air. So this is not a guy waging war. He's trying to make peace between the people. So the whole picture that's painted of him in the press, and again, the ones that echo the RNDDH, which again is an arm of, as you say, NAD and the US Embassy, surprise, surprise, are the Washington Post, AP, a thing called Insight News. I think it's Insight, which is another NED outfit. And this is then echoed through all the radio stations, which are again owned by the bourgeoisie. So they've made the boogeyman is the guy fighting the boogeymen. So Cherizier has been totally demonized. People may have seen it today on Democracy Now! Even the so-called left or pseudo-left, who become more royalist than the king, are saying, oh my God, Haiti Liberté is supporting the monsters. And, but they haven't gone and met with the monsters. They haven't talked to the monsters or even to his so-called victims, many of whom said, listen, RNDDH came and they put words in my mouth. I wasn't a victim of him, but, they were going to give me some money and et cetera, et cetera. So this is the situation. We have this boogeyman being created in Cherizier, and he's being radicalized by this, Dan. He's being, he didn't get his political playbook out of, Lenin or Marx or Frantz Fanon. He just learned it through betrayal after betrayal. So he's learning as he's going, but he is a natural leader. And we at Haiti Liberté are doing our best to try to guide and influence him. He's not one of us. He's not out of our organization, but I think he's the real deal. And I think the revolution that he has ignited, you never know where it's going to come from. Sometimes these things pop out of places you didn't expect. And this time it's coming out of the lumpen proletariat of Port-au-Prince. One last thing. It was Frantz Fanon, really. I mean, Marx and Engels, and I've said this on other shows, Marx and Engels, looked very askance at the lumpen proletariat. They called it the dangerous class, etc. But Lenin, Mao, Amilcar Cabral, and above all, Frantz Fanon said in his writings, he said, there are two classes we in the neo-colonies really cannot neglect, and we have to work with them. One is the peasantry, which at one point was cast aside by communists, but then Mao and Fidel showed that the peasantry can be very key to making a revolution. And Frantz Fanon said the lumpen proletariat, because of course the Algerian Revolution in the 1950s was largely carried out with the lumpen proletariat. One only has to go watch the fantastic film Battle of Algiers to understand that story. So we feel this lumpen proletariat uprising that is happening is very important, cannot be dismissed, cannot be backhanded. And it's very unfortunate to see leftists and pseudo-leftists and people who should be thinking and analyzing more, falling into basically what is a US Embassy talking point line of demonizing the guy who really is bringing change. Because frankly, in the short space of a year or two, Cherizier has done a lot more. He's got guns, he's got arms, he's ready to fight. These people have nothing to lose. And that's what Mao said. He said, the lumpen proletariat, they are very brave. So we are at that moment where they have done more to really put revolution on the table in Haiti than the left has done from their salons and parlors over the past 2 or 3 decades.
So to kind of bring it back to the assassination of Jovenel Moïse, you're saying that basically it's the bourgeoisie's fear of revolution that likely spurred this apparent foreign operation of foreign mercenaries to ice him in order to basically bring someone in who
Right.
is in what they hope is capable of stamping out this revolutionary
Right.
movement.
That's my working hypothesis right now, just from the facts that I have, because I think that he scared the daylights out of them. They really said, this is coming like a freight train. We got to move fast. Jovenel was, a stick in the mud. He didn't want to be prosecuted for the Petro-Caribe crimes. It was found that he got a lot of the corruption, the billions of dollars that were and millions of dollars that were embezzled basically from the Petro-Caribe fund. He, it was also a matter of pride. He'd gotten there. Here was a guy who was basically had been a poor peasant from the northeast of the country who had arrived in the presidency. And so there's a lot of pride involved too. And, simply I don't know what other kind of deals he might have had, but the fact is he was not ready to move despite incredible amounts of pressure, both from the people and from the bourgeoisie on him. So I think they said, we got to get this guy out of the way. This was their solution, ice him, as you say, and then try to get in a transitional president. Now, who's going to be president? That's the big question. The nominally, the constitutionally, the next guy who's supposed to step in is the president of the Supreme Court. He just died of COVID, which is ravaging Haiti right now. Last week, his funeral was supposed to be today, and they have a new prime minister who was named on Monday, a guy called Dr. Ariel Henry, who seems to also be some kind of U.S. agent. He was part of the Council of Sages, which helped carry out the transition from Aristide to the de facto government after the 2004 coup. So they seem to be trying to bring him back. But the other one constitutionally that maybe they can try to slip in there is the head of the Senate, who 1/3 of the Senate still exists. That's the only thing left of the parliament that hasn't expired. And the head of that is a guy called Joseph Lambert, who is an old, very reactionary, very corrupt, very ruthless politician, but he's been around since the king was a corporal, as they say in Creole. And he maybe could end up being the interim president. I don't know. But more than likely, what the US likes to do is find somebody with a slight leftist or Lavalas, which is the name of the movement around Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who is still in Cuba recuperating from some illness, maybe COVID. And the last interim president, a guy called Prévert, was just that. He kind of worked with the Lavalas, but he was able to cross the aisle. So they're probably looking for somebody like that, somebody who will be acceptable, palatable to the people, to the liberals, to various people. They don't want to get somebody quite as crusty and throwback as Joseph Lambert, in my way of thinking. So anyway, it's a real open, but the biggest problem of all, Dan, is that, you have this revolution, which is already underway. The people, there's nothing in front of them right now. The way is open. I don't know, this guy who's at the head of the police, Léon Charles, he's like a close US tool. We talk about it from the WikiLeaks documents that we got in Haiti Liberté. People can check a lot of this stuff on Haiti Liberté. And, is he going to be able to hold the core of the state together, the armed force, which is this 15,000 police force? A lot of these guys in the police force are involved in the kidnapping, involved in the crime, or demoralized, outgunned many times by the gangs they're up against. So you have a very challenging situation for the state in Haiti. And again, this is another reason why they would love to be able to just bring in US troops and take the country over again. But, there's the China question.
All right. I think we can leave it there. Kim Ives, English language editor of the fantastic newspaper Haiti Liberté, which everyone who's watching this and wants to kind of get a little more background information should check out. It's maybe probably the most important and one of the few, if only, resources in English to understand some of what's going on the ground in Haiti. So thank you very much for your time and expertise, Kim.
Well, great honor to be interviewed by Dan Cohen. And I loved the Killing Gaza, by the way, which we showed, of course, with Max and at Haiti Liberté. And keep up the good work.